Our final session for the day is a panel discussion, so I'd love our panel members to join us on stage. Professor Callum Drummond from RMIT, Kate Taylor from KCA board, but also QUT, and Leon Sandler, who has flown in and has joined us previously from MIT. So we're going to explore how SCOPRA data can be used to improve universities' research commercialisation performance and contribute feedback on how to measure success for research commercialisation. The panel members, you've hopefully read bios when you registered for this event. So each of our guests is quite distinguished in their fields. They're going to introduce themselves very quickly in 2 to 3 minutes. They're going to basically say who they are, where they work or worked most recently, what they do, and what that role has with respect to commercialisation. Then I'll ask them 2 questions, and then floor is open for you guys to ask all the rest. I'll let you go. Who's going to get up first? You've all got a microphone, so hopefully when you get up and, or actually you don't have to, it's up to you if you want to stand or not.
Okay.
Can people see from the back? Yes? No? Okay.
Do we need us to stand or sit?
However you feel comfortable for the audience.
Okay.
Up to you.
So I'll keep it very quickly. I'm going to use your analogy of the coal miner, but I would say I spent the last 18 years, maybe it's as a gold miner, so trying to get that research gold from deep underground out to the surface where it can actually spin out into spin out. So that's my focus, not as much on the data, but it's how do you actually move the stuff from research in the lab to getting it out into the world.
Hi everyone, I'm Kate Taylor. I work at QUT. I'm the Director of Health and Social Impact. I've got all my badges on today, so I'm a proud RTTP. So I am a tech transfer professional, and I'm also on the board of KCA. I've worked in a couple of different TTOs and models as well, including regional unis with less resources.
The technology. I'm Callum Drummond from RMIT, 27 years in CSIRO. My last job there was Group Executive for Manufacturing Materials and Minerals. I oversaw 40% of the CSIRO IP portfolio for the last 8 years. I was in the organisation. Went out for 3.5 years in a startup company, which was an Intel portfolio company. We raised 60 million in venture capital and then eventually listed on the London Alternative Index market and were valued at 110 million Australian. Then moved to RMIT, been there for 11 years, Deputy Vice Chancellor Research, and as part of my responsibilities I have oversight of the IP management and commercialisation activities. Thank you.
Excellent. So I'd like to start this off with, what does commercialisation success look like for you at your university?
I can start. So at QUT we have our motto, University for the Real World. I don't think we've ever changed it, and that's definitely a part of what we do across the board, including when it comes to research and commercialisation. So from our perspective, we're focused on looking at the impact from research, both economic and social. So we have a couple of KPIs that we keep track of in our team, including research coming in, what our strategic partnerships look like, as well as what those outputs look like. So we don't just measure deals by the dollar value, we're looking at all outgoing deals and what kind of impact that they can create. So our connection strategy is really about focusing on those transformational partnerships to enable it.
Similar to Kate, our focus is on the impact. We use an impact framework to monitor that. It's a variation on a very well-known impact framework, which is the Kellogg framework, and there's 5 components to that: inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impact. The universities only really participate in 4 of those 5 areas. I'm a great believer, and it was interesting to see that quote from Kevin Cullen, because he clearly is a great believer in what I'm about to say as well. I don't believe universities deliver impact. It's actually the people that come after us in the value chain that deliver impact. So it's very important that we understand what's under our control and what we can directly influence or what we can directly manage, and then through partnerships understand what needs to happen after us. Because we don't make the products, we don't make the processes, we don't implement the new financial services, the new laws, the new regulations. That's all someone else. So we need to understand our role in the value chain and how we help influence the final impact.
Great. So I would say at MIT, one of the slogans we've used is impact, not income. So the focus, I think the whole focus of everything we do, it's not about bringing in licensing revenue, although MIT does bring in a lot of revenue, does a lot of licenses, but that's not what drives it. So we do have all those statistics. You can actually find that licensing office every year publishes that autumn type chart with all the numbers, but nobody, I'd say within the university, looks at that much. So it's very much, can we do research and then get it out into the world where it's going to make a difference? I think for us, our philosophy was really that university research is best commercialized by startups. We haven't seen large companies do a great job of it. You've got to get it to a certain point in a startup and then they acquire it. But that's, I think, is the focus. There was another point I was thinking of with Callum, but I lost it and I'll come back to it.
Great, thank you. How important is the use of commercialisation data and trends and other measures in you setting your commercialisation strategy?
Yeah, it's about understanding, and someone used this terminology earlier, I think in fact it might have been you, Harold. It's about understanding the context. So, for a certain level of inputs, whether that's number of researchers, whether that's number of support staff, whether that's actually research revenue, what can you reasonably expect in terms of outputs and outcomes? And so that's why benchmarking is really important, because you can see relative to other players in the sector, and it was good to see normalisation of the data in that tool that was just reported. Then you can start to say, well, I'm performing above the sector in, say, invention disclosures, but our conversion to that provisional patents is lower. Now, all the universities have different strategies, they have different approaches, they have different emphasis, they have different weightings in terms of what sectors they deploy their activity in. So it's not necessarily going to be apples comparing with apples, but it does give you a feel for where you're underdone and where you might be performing well. And so that's where we mainly use those sort of numbers. And for us, and I meant to say this earlier, it really is about partnering for success. And so the best metric for us is when the people we partner with actually say, this wouldn't have happened without RMIT's involvement. And it's a bit hard to quantify that, but it's certainly the narratives, the stories are very, very important.
Okay, so I remember what I was going to say. So one of the things which we would say is an area of tech transfer, which we don't see in the statistics here, is a lot of our tech transfer happens on 2 legs, which is when students go out. So you train PhDs and postdocs, and they really have this detailed knowledge. Yeah, you've got a patent, but that's not where the knowledge is, and they go out into industry. MIT has probably the highest percentage of research funding from industry of any university in the US, so huge industry engagement. And one of the reasons industry likes to do that is then they often hire some of these people, and also we'll have professors who there may be research in the lab, they consult with industry. So you have this very porous relationship with information flowing backwards and forwards. And so I think that's something that also, we like to see over there is information flowing from industry into the research so you can understand the problems to work on. But I didn't help you with the data or the data.
I was going to add, so first of all, well done on that dashboard. It's really cool. I got to have a play with it beforehand, and I'm quite competitive too. So it was really nice to kind of see where QUT is doing well and where we can do even better. And, call out to Catherine too, who won the KCA award last year. And Macquarie was doing very well, and the data shows it. I think that's one of the things that I would reflect on that data can be useful for. We all know it's lumpy and it kind of takes forever, but you can also have a look at your own institution and how it's changed over time. And also you may be familiar with other universities and when they've put in place strategies, and you kind of see how effective they have been, and tap those leaders on the shoulder and think about, well, is there something that I can apply from there over here too? So, we focus on our day-to-day, but it is a good, are we going pretty well for the number of resources we have within our context? And are there strategies that others are using that we should look at?
Right, excellent. I'd like to open the floor for questions. Make sure you use your name, your institution, and your concise question, not your commentary. Thank you. Sorry, did you? Oh, sorry, I thought you were going, Tam, but you were drinking. Sorry.
I don't want more work. Ken Mark from Campus Plus. Just the commentary around that the university doesn't actually deliver the impact, but it's the key enabler for that to occur in the first place. In that commercialisation, particularly during that initial translation stage, we measure invention disclosures and other aspects. How are we capturing the investment beyond those activities? So there's non-financial effort that's made by the university. We see the number of TTPs that are listed in those roles as a measure. Are there other factors we should consider in the data sets that we're capturing and reflecting in terms of the effectiveness?
I think it's a great question, and certainly what I observed, and I observed it in CSIRO, and I'm now observed it in RMIT as well. There's a lot of industry engagement by researchers that actually isn't captured by the statistics. So, in a way, there's this free for industry resource, which if the academics or the researchers have developed good relationship with industry, they'll get on the phone and they'll say, you know what, I'm having this problem with this process, and have you got any ideas? And the researcher, if they do have ideas, will provide that information flow back, but that doesn't appear in any of the the quantitative metrics. So I don't know how you would capture that. I hesitate to say another survey because we're all surveyed out. But I think that's, in terms of knowledge exchange, perhaps it lacks full transparency at the moment.
Sorry, you'd like to add? John didn't get to answer a question before, so please
That's all right.
indulge.
I think a good question, Callum. In the metrics we put forward, there is one metric which is not TTO related, and that's research contracts, or as the department calls HERD 3C, which is contract research from for-profit companies, international and local. I think that is a measure of what you're talking about, because the $808 million that Australian universities got from companies is crisp, green, foldy stuff. They don't have to send to a university, and they do it because there's expertise within that university and relationships with researchers. So I just make the point that I think that is one measure of that, and I certainly agree it's an important activity.
Yes, so I think something, and again, you have to figure out how you measure this. but which is worth thinking about. If you have, in your tech transfer office, you're dealing with PIs, with faculty, and they have disclosures, and you have all these cases. But the licensing officers, you should have a feel for which of those things do you think should be spinning out and which shouldn't. And the question is how much of the stuff that's in the university that should or could spin out is not spinning out? Are you getting, because some percent, only maybe a quarter of them or some percent should actually go out, they just aren't good enough. But is there stuff that's sort of stuck in your university that with a little bit of help could get out there? Or is it all getting out there?
Oh, sorry, just went Callum.
Sorry, Natalie,
No,
I was just going to add to that. When the ARC came out with its engagement and impact assessment, it deliberately included engagement in there because it's really hard to measure impact, especially because a lot of it's lagging, right? And so the assumption there is, and it's almost a statistical assumption, that if you do enough engagement, some of that will end up in impact, right? So it seemed to be important to raise over time the amount of engagement. And I sometimes think about, we put in a lot of proposals and a lot of grants with industry that are unsuccessful. Yet that's a measure of engagement, right? I mean, the average success rate now for most Australian grants is between 15 and 20%. And I know for a fact that companies take that information and they'll try and work out how they can support it through their own means or whatever. So there's knowledge exchange, there's an information exchange there, but we don't actually capture it anywhere. And it would be good to actually to sort of analyse the grants that haven't been successful and what happened to those as well. I'm a big believer in trying to stimulate engagement as much as possible, because I don't know about people in this room, but I can't predict where the ultimate impact is going to be in many, many areas. So you just got to work on that statistical, that you don't want to put everything on 36 black. You probably want to pick a few more numbers as well. So, and also in terms of value chain, we focus a lot on getting the pipeline right up front. So if you look at our numbers, compared to the amount of research revenue we have, we're probably, if you normalise it, we're probably the highest in Australia in terms of invention disclosure statements. And that's deliberate, because we want to get the visibility really early on, and we want to start to make early decisions. When do we partner? What do we do in-house to get it to a certain stage? Because if you don't have the visibility, then you don't have the choices. I used to call them submarine activities, because a lot of academics tend to want to float under the water, because as soon as they poke their periscope up and you identify that they're there, then as an institution you'll have expectations on them, and they want to control the amount of expectations you have on them. So whenever you see a periscope, you say, "Aha, I've got you."
Hi, it's Selena Boyfield from CSIRO, the ON program. I've sort of missed the boat a bit because you've moved on, but I just want to say we collect with our programs in On Prime and On Accelerate. We ask researchers to go out and conduct 100 customer interviews, which is really going and talking to industry. Get out of the building and talk. And on our brag sheet, I think in the last couple of years we're up to around 50,000, but we are creating sort of information on that, because I think it's extremely important, because in those conversations is when you validate if your research is needed or wanted.
I can probably add on to that. I think ON's got about 10% of researchers going through their program as well, and that's something that we pay a lot of attention to at QUT as well. So last year with our partners, we would have run about 56 events or training opportunities and pushed through, 800 or so academics attending those. And I think that's another good signal, and perhaps even earlier than the disclosures, is are researchers engaging in this kind of activity? Are they interested in building confidence to reach out to industry? And then how does that move through the pipeline?
I should also say that Leon was involved in the ICOR program in the States from very early on, and to a certain extent the CSIRO One program is a derivative of the ICOR program. So Leon might want to say a few words.
Well, actually, it's interesting. ICOR was actually, if you look at when it was launched from National Science Foundation, I know the guys there, it's modeled on what we were doing at our center at MIT. Which was very much around, so what we did, just to give it in 2 seconds, is we actually gave out money to academics whose technology was quite interesting, thought it had a commercial application, but it wasn't really fundable. So it's a question of getting them to the point where it could be fundable. And there were 2 things that investors look at. The one is technology risk. So it was figuring out what do you have to do over the next 2 years, and we'd give them the money to do, call them applied experiments to get, and their data is really, really important because it's the data the investors want to see. Did the experiments work? But the other key thing is market risk. And the only way you understand market risk is you have to go out and talk to customers. So, when one says industry here, you sort of have this image of these big mining companies in Western, but industry can be the hospital down the road. It's the doctors. It's whatever the product is, getting out and talking to people. And so we'd actually put a program in training. It's generally, sometimes it's the faculty, you can get them out, but it's the PhDs and the postdocs going out, talking to people. And the nice thing when you're giving them money is you've got this forcing function to make them do stuff. Even if it's a very small amount of money, they tend to do it.
They have to up the periscope, and they have to speak to people outside their close family.
Excellent. This guy and this one? Yeah. Thanks.
Hello, my name is James Riley. I'm an American entrepreneur here in Australia. My wife's Australian. Really enjoyed building my startup here. But I overall done ICOR 3 times, connected to the Harvard School of Education, connected to Berkeley, and listening to you talk about the way your technology transfer system works seems a little bit different in some ways. And I was wondering, even your note there that licensing kind of comes last, or it's not a primary focus, and how that is different in some ways to how I've seen universities structured around Australia. And I was wondering if you could just comment on some of the systematic or structural changes or differences you see between the MIT system and some of the Australian systems, and if you could speak to any of those themes. Leon.
So, I'd first say I am not an expert on the Australian system at all. Depending on universities, even in the US, MIT is a very unique place because it sort of grew from the bottom up from like 1860 doing this stuff. So we have lots of different groups. So my group did not sit within the technology licensing area at all. In other universities, it would sit within that, or you'd have some group together. But we work with these people very, very closely. So every single project we funded, we had a mentor group and we had a licensing officer as part of that. So we worked hand in glove with these people. But I think it's, I would say, and I'd have lots and lots of people would come and visit us, including Callum, by the way, from all over the place. And we used to say, listen, if you think you want to do this commercialization stuff to make money for the university, and your trustees have said that, just stop now, because you're going to fail. It's not MIT. If you pull up the data, I think last year they did, I can't remember, last year or the year before, the one year they did 40 million in licensing revenue, the next year they did 80. It goes up and down. But some years they don't even cover the patent costs, but it's not where you make the money in the licensing revenue. You get in money from other sources, but the key is to sort of get the deals done, get the stuff out there. I think the difference that I've seen is the focus, and it's the culture at MIT which is built up, is the professors, the students, the postdocs are unbelievably keen to do startups. So that's what they like to do, is to get these things out, and we have an ecosystem there that lets us do that.
Yeah.
We work with tons of launch companies, but there's very rarely a conversation. The only time the launch company might license something is basically if the professors don't want to do a startup, often if they've concluded this doesn't make sense. And there are times where it's better going to a launch company, but the focus is absolutely on spinning these things out.
Yeah. Would you mind just one quick follow-on question? Where does the university win then? If it's not the licensing, like what is that big return on investment?
So the big return, if you're researching, a university is doing good stuff for society. So World War II, radar, most of the radar stuff was developed at MIT. There's tons of stuff that's come out of it. AI, let's talk about AI for a second. How long has MIT been doing research in AI? I was just talking about VP of Research. Because stuff just goes along in basic research, goes along, and then suddenly 70 years, not 70. So we have 2 nuclear reactors. It's been going on a long time. We have a spin out a few years ago, just recently, that's doing nuclear fusion. Nuclear fusion, they've now raised $1.5 billion. But that's long-term program. So I think the play is really helping the world. How do we fund all that? If you're asking where the funding comes from, trivial example, and then I'll shut up. Any of you heard of Bose Corporation, Bose Speakers, Bose Radio? Dr. Bose was a professor at MIT, young professor. His master student, Sherwin Greenblatt, in 1965, they spun out this little company, 1 employee for the first year, to do speakers and the like. At those days, there was no Bayh-Dole Act. MIT just sort of said, here, take all the patents or take all the intellectual property. They did that. Fast forward, whatever it is, 40 years, 50 years later or more, MIT had no ownership, no licenses, no royalties. Privately owned company, Dr. Bose died, gave all his shares to MIT. So billions of dollars worth. So the play is really, if people are successful, students, faculty, whatever, and they make a lot of money, it's a long-term play, they'll give back. That's the simple play.
Sorry, you want to add to that, Kate?
I was just going to add context in Australia. And so, I was listening to one of your YouTubes, you're talking about, market risk, technology risk, but also team risk. And I think that's something that's a bit different in our context. So, we're going to be holding a debate about should researchers be founders. And so I think the reality is in Australia, we have some amazing researchers and academics who have become founders, but we don't have a lot of them. And we certainly don't have a lot who've done it multiple times over, coming back into the ecosystem and being champions for that work. And I would love to have the philanthropic dollars that are in the US, but we also don't have that in our context. So we are working with the resources we have in the most efficient way we can, but there are some unique aspects, especially around the team and some of those funding pots that make it a little bit more challenging, and we have to just do it a little bit differently.
Excellent. Oh, sorry, Callum?
Sorry, just to specifically answer your question in a different way. Most Australian universities are billion-dollar corporations, right? Or some of them are $3 or $4 billion corporations. You do not, to Leon's point, you do not do it for the money. Even if we got what MIT got, like 50 million or 80 million, that's a very small part of our, of our overall business model, if you like. You do it for the impact that you can have beyond the academic community. You do it so that, we can have the society that we want to live in, the environment that we want to enjoy. And if we want to have the society that we desire as Australians and the environment that we have as Australians, then we need to be generating wealth. And so you play part of that role in hopefully
transfer perspective.
I'm just going to add a comment, by the way, from your thing about, gee, we're in Australia and we don't have the people and can't do it. So the answer is there's smart people everywhere. So I've been to places all over the world. There's everywhere there are really sharp people who can do this and start stuff. It's just getting it going. The other thing I will say categorically, okay, faculty are not the people who are going to start and run the companies. They're the people who get them started. They're very important. If the faculty wants to run the company, it will fail, period, and still keep their job unless they're going to quit. But you've got smart PhDs, smart postdocs. I've had 50 spin-outs from my center over the last 20 years, but it's a complete spectrum. Some of them are, PhD student who never did a business degree, who's built this thing up to $400 and $500 million company, but sharp as a tack. Another woman who also PhD, no business background, she's running this significant company. Then others, if it takes a lot of money, they bring in some outside person. So you've got to get the ball rolling. People say, we have people, the ex-head of our licensing office, Lita Nelson, used to say, when people come to her and they say, well, how do you do all this stuff at MIT? And she said, it's like the guy who goes to England, you'll understand this one, could be Australia, and he sees these people playing bowls on the ground. He says, wow, how do you get that grass so smooth? And they say, well, it's easy. You just plant the grass and you just roll it for 400 years. So I think the thing is, it's easy when you've been doing it a while, but you have to start somewhere. And what'll happen is I'll guarantee you'll have one or two little things. They don't have to be giant things. They could be $15 million companies. And then it sort of snowballs. People pick it up. And I think it goes from there. So
I was going to say, most Australian universities, as you know, are comprehensive universities. So our university, for example, only 1/3 is STEM. 2/3 is something other than STEM. And we deliberately chose not to have a tech transfer office. We call it a research translation unit because we didn't want to alienate or disenfranchise all the people that we want to translate research, and it doesn't necessarily involve patents or commercialisation of patents. So we think about it in terms of pathway to impact, not pathway to market. That's only a subset of pathway to impact. And then there are multiple pathways to impact, depending on what you're focusing on and what to translate. I mean, you can have enormous impact if you provide an evidence base to, say, a government department, and that informs new policy or new program development. And but that won't be picked up in commercialisation sort of metrics. But you could actually change something significant in the Australian context through your input there, and quite frequently you're not overt in that process because it's counterproductive to start not that. So,
things. Person sort of look back off as professors. How do you suddenly that is and again except
the see add annuity from place to place, so you don't actually get time to have the mic and I'm in this room. But I would encourage people about because it can change very hard to get that sustained performance growth in institutions who've had it for a long time.
Harold has a question. Thanks. I had already answer it. I'm not sure.
So we've seen that SCOPA can be used to identify, where certain institutions are performing certain aspects of commercialisation practice, including leaders in the sector. So question that we're really interested in the department, how can we support and encourage universities to share best practice? And I'm particularly interested in Kate's views.
I'm a TTO, so I say fund us first. It was 3 that went under the CHIPS Act. That's a good start. No, I think I do think that's occurring. So especially being on the board of KCA, that's what KCA was formed to do. It was formed to share best practice across Australia and New Zealand and those institutions and be able to help the sector improve and grow and share. How do you manage conflicts of interest? Thinking about venture builders. And we do that across the network. So, we are connected and Autumn and all of those associations. I think there are mechanisms there already that we should just utilise and maybe light a fire underneath them, as well as lots of those conversations that happen naturally go through meetings. They're often talking about these in pockets. So I think there are existing organisations that just need a little bit more support, but it's certainly occurring.
Absolutely agree with what Kate says. KCA has been an amazing catalyst and enabler for Australia. Also think increasingly I can see playing out, essentially for us, co-located with the university across the street, go back and doing activity with them, with courses, and we're progressing jointly a lot of stuff and being in other that close proximity because it makes sense, and that's how you can optimise and maximise in the regional individual.
And Queensland recently, the state government brought a group together for quantum innovation. So that was to bring the stakeholders across, thinking about how can we support innovation and stuff and that a bit better, and that used everyone into a conversation. We had venture capitalists, all the kind of ecosystem, figure out what is best and how can we improve it together. So I think those issues that force all sides coming together and to brainstorm.
Yeah, I would say absolutely. It's about spending the time talking to people. It's hard. For years, perhaps people from around the world saying, "Why don't you host this sort of big international conference at MIT on doing the stuff you do?" But you're very busy doing your day job, and it's like, where do I carve the time out? It's getting groups together like this. It's harder where people are spread geographically. If you're in an area, I'm a giant believer in food. Get people together for 6 months. We would do this. We had call ourselves the Gang of 4, and then it became the Gang of 5, the Gang of 6. And we get together once every 3 months. To me, they had a licensing office, they had the entrepreneurship center, but it's just getting people together to talk about stuff. I think it's critical to sort of carve that time out, and somebody facilitates, having the group meet.
Related to your positioning in government, there is definitely a role for government to play. I'm old enough to remember what it was like before NCREAS, and every institution just invested in their own infrastructure, and there was very little sharing that went on. And the government stood up NCREAS, and in the early days, some tried to put forward options where the infrastructure was only going to be for that institution. And the federal government was very strong. They said, no, the C in NCREAS stands for collaborative. So you do not get funding unless you're prepared to. And our research infrastructure, and I was at an NCREAS international sort of research infrastructure meeting just at the back end last year. I think we have the best system in research infrastructure in the world. And that is due to government, prioritisation and stimulation, and that maybe a bit of a stick along with the carrot.
Do we have one last quick question?
Hi, Sita from University of Canberra. We've touched upon resources, and I know we talked about how we can share knowledge and stuff, and I understand with their MIT, QUT and MIT, they're all big universities who can afford tech transfers of the research translation office, but do you have any advice for us smaller universities on how we can also make impact in commercialization or research translation? I know we have Supreme here and KCA here. What are other sources that we can use? Thanks.
I was going to say you have a big brother nearby, but it's maybe big sister's better, called the ANU. So I'd be looking to partner if I was the University of Canberra. Although that's a checkered path, because some universities chose to get the UniQuest to do their certificate, and then that agreement. So I think you'd want to go in with clear understanding of, what you were going to get. It's like any relationship; unless there's mutual benefit, it's not going to last. So you have to look at what's going to make this sustainable. But there's an argument that probably you shouldn't stand up your own tech transfer. It doesn't necessarily need to be in Canberra. Maybe there's another institution. Maybe with like institutions, you can form, a tech transfer office that represents 4 or 5 universities. So that's why my first takes me.
When I moved to Tasmania, I went to join their only director for their tech transfer office. one university in the state. And it was a really interesting experience to go, okay, I'm it. That's what I'm in for. But your advice is right, Callum. I would say it's through partnerships. So, be careful what you wish for. Big TTOs aren't all that great either. Whereas when you're small, you can be nimble and you can actually use your network far more effectively. So my advice would be partner very strategically, do it well, but also know what you're going for, everything. Like I think a small TTO shouldn't be looking at venture building. That's really resource intensive. So how can I partner with someone else to help me enable that while I can focus on whatever my strength is?
Did you, Leon, sorry, did you want to comment at all? Okay, great. Nice. Could you please thank our panel? Thanks for engaging enthusiastically with us today. There's a few take-homes which I found particularly interesting in all of this, which is you don't do it for the money, right? There is this urge to get something out for the good of the country, for the good of the institutions, because researchers were passionate, they want to change the world, and you as tech transfer professionals are able to make that happen. The Department of Industry said they're going to be using new data sets in their R&D review, which have not been used before, and they described as an amazing resource. Blade data, which is tax and IP data, and Plido employment data. The Department of Education have a range of current programs designed to change culture in the country and also put a bit more tech transfer in there. It's the pipeline of industry-ready PhDs and getting that conversation going a bit more smoothly between industry and research. And they're hoping that programs like the Trailblazers will be exemplars for IP and commercialisation. The impact, not income, as success for a university was an interesting statement because unis all define success differently. And we need to consider that when we're looking at all of the measures that are, the metrics that are being measured. MIT has a huge industry engagement where they've described it as a porous relationship, which is a good thing in this particular case as you move between industry and research, both knowledge and people. So, universities, we're all trying to make our graduates employable. So obviously strength, collaboration with industry is in our best interest, not just to be looking for the money. The dashboard that was demonstrated today is a powerful tool that will really help us see data in a different way. And also, if you're a small office, actually have access to that ability because you certainly don't have the time for it. And congratulations to Macquarie University, obviously. A big, great bang for buck on their research expenditure with LO income. Hey, I am just writing down the words that came out of people's mouths. The last point I have is that the data also seem to show that tech transfer professionals in Australia are in the top 3 in the world for what you do.
One off. We want to have a continuing dialogue with you about all this stuff. So feel free to reach out and engage with us. So, thanks.
That is literally it. Yes. Everyone's saying thanks.